We're moving on to item E, which is the necessity for school construction update. I just want to make a comment that we are now at 8:55 and we would really like to, I know that we want to get everyone's input on this, but I was hoping that, I want to let the committee and Ryan and Ned to do the presentation, and then we'll accept questions from the public, questions, comments, or concerns. Let's see if we can try to keep them as short as possible, but I do want everyone to be heard, so we're going to do our best. I understand Ryan's going on this one. Ryan's starting us off. Okay, Mr. Callahan, Dr. Callahan, you have the floor.
Thanks, Linda. I will try to be succinct. So thank all of you for sticking around for this discussion on the necessity for school construction update. I really want to thank all of the committee members and the community members and the town council members for participating in this dialogue. A lot of really good questions have come to us recently, but throughout this process, and I really appreciate everybody's patience in this. I do want to acknowledge that this is a complex and evolving process. I realize that there are times when information is not readily available, and that can be frustrating, and it can make our community members feel like they're not part of the process, and that's definitely not what we're about. It's not something that we're trying to foster. So I really appreciate your patience as we go through this, and I think you'll see that we have more of a format going forward of the action items that need to be completed and what's about to take place. All right, so what I'd like to do tonight is walk you through some of the highlights of what we've done, how we got here, and then the next steps. And I've done this a number of times, so I'm not going to take a ton of time on that. So let's see if you can see my screen. All right. Is that visible? Okay, great. So here's the necessity of construction process. Stage one goes through this identifying the need, facilities assessment, and just getting to a point where you identify options and what path you want to take going forward. And that's really where we ended up this past February, when the school committee voted to move forward with exploring one of those options. Now we're at this point where we have to take this concept, this high level concept, and move it through a stage two, develop a solution for it, right? And that then goes to, there's multiple parts to that, and I'll show you some of those parts. And then out of stage two comes an improved application. It'll go to RIDE, get approval. Once it's approved, it then moves forward into the final design reviews, and before it ends up going to the voters. All right, we went through the stage one submission process, number of parts to that, statement of interest, capital facilities update, that type of thing. The first major portion of this is to identify the brick and mortar aspect of our facilities and where those needs are. Once we got through that, it came through engagement in looking at our initial findings with respect to Charahoe's strategic vision plan, our assessment of our infrastructure, a summary of the engineering reports related to the buildings that we have. And then coming out of that, we were able to document facility assessments and then ultimately get a summary of those facilities. The point of the summary is just to look at what in our brick and mortar infrastructure is in need, and with respect to this incentivized position that the state has put forward, where could we see the biggest benefit from a fiscal standpoint for the Charahoe district? And you can see here where we ended up looking in terms of the newer and fewer concepts where consolidation is incentivized. we note that our 4 elementary schools are old, anywhere from 1968 to 1935. And then what you have is the existing square footage of the building, the grades that are serviced there, the number of students that are in each building, the current utilization, which is effectively how close to capacity that building is. And then it's given what's considered a facility condition index. And that basically represents the amount of repair or upkeep or capital need a building has in order to make it viable. A larger number is a worse number in that case.
Ryan, are you?
And you can compare,
because we're not seeing that. Are
you? You can't see any?
No, right now we just have the Charahoe Regional Schools, like the introduction screen. Sorry.
Well, you missed a fantastic presentation.
No, you're doing a great job. There you go. There it is. There you have it now.
All right. So let me try something. If I move, do you see the page turn? No.
Yes, we can see the little hand. Yes, now the page is turning.
All right. So summary of facility assessments is what you see.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let me see if I can back it down to that. Okay. So with respect to the facility assessment, it gives us an assessment, well, it's redundant, assessment of the buildings and their capital needs. And then there's an engineering work that goes into put a dollar amount on those capital needs. We also did a demographic report that's available. School committee was provided with a number of options. We narrowed them down and we came up with 3, an A, B, and C option. Option A was a consolidation of the 4 elementary schools into one large school. Option B was consolidation or elimination of one of the elementary schools and expanding the other 3. And then option C is the capital plan as we would normally do it with respect to a 5-year capital plan. Now, last February, the school committee decided to move forward with exploring option A. Now, that does not solidify option A as the default position forever. It is an evolving process. It's going to take a lot of effort to fully scope out option A. And along the way, there are multiple engagement points, both with community as well as the school committee to develop the scope of that. All right, so the next steps, what are the next steps in this process? Now that the school committee has authorized it, we have, since that February meeting, Ned and Gina and the Necessity for School Committee have engaged and worked with Colliers and RGB to come up with a milestone schedule. They've met with RIDE to engage their input as well. And tonight is the first night that we are able to present that out and talk about what those next steps are, as well as talk about what needs financially we have to put in place in order to explore this option A position. All right, so I'll try and make this a little bit larger. All right, so we had already talked, if you look at, you'll see the stage, the development project approach, that was through February and March. All right, we had a school committee meeting, basically approving to explore this, meeting with RIDE, and then obviously tonight is a process discussion. Coming out of this, the next steps are to engage an architect, and that's to issue that, and there's a number of steps in this, issue RFQ, solicitation of that, get a short list, basically negotiate that. And that's to take place through March to the end of April. Once we have that architect in place, it's to move into the conceptual design phase, which is the scoping, budget, debt capacity, There's a substantial amount of engagement, both with respect from the community as well as the school committee. There's a number of checkpoints in this process. And you can see it starts in May and effectively goes until the end of August. Now, the output from this is that by the end of August, we have a full scope of the project that can be brought to the school committee for approval. All right? And you can see it includes a number of things that have been touched on, feedback that has been provided to us from the community at large, whether it's traffic impact, environmental impact, those types of things. That's part of this developing the scope of the project. After that, it goes into a schematic design phase, package to complete a package by the end of this calendar year. After that, it goes into basically the financial portion of it, getting an estimate on the project. Now, the timing for this is important because this is to sync up with our budget cycle next year. After that, it goes into necessity approval or final approval from the committee, and then final school committee approval, both within the budget cycle, right? There will be opportunities at that point in time where we address the legislation necessary to move this forward, and then final submission to RIDE. Once RIDE approves this, George isn't here, but we'll form the school building committee, right? All of this is taking place in the 2022 year. That is, it'll be discussed in that budget context. Now, there is a lot of opportunity in this process, not just for feedback, but to either augment the scope, change the scope completely if need be, or discontinue the project if we find that we've reached an impasse in terms of a desire to continue it. So I want to turn it over to Ned as well as Gina so that Ned can talk about the capital aspect of it. I know that's something that George Ure had brought up, as well as some other folks. So we want to address that at the beginning. But I just want to thank all of you and just continue to ask and engage and lean into this process. So thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Callahan. Mr. Draper, you have the floor.
Sure, thank you. As Ryan demonstrated well, you have an idea now of the timeline and the process. And I think a lot of the frustration in the community is, as we've heard back from folks, is we don't have financial answers yet. And the reason for that is that conceptual design phase is going to take us through a lot of necessary steps in the sites, what exactly the design and the education plan will look like. We have to work it out with RGB, or if we choose to select a different architect, figure out how we want the schools to function. And that in turn will create a lot of other considerations. Now, Rod, when we spoke with them earlier this week, they had a lot of concerns, as we do, about traffic patterns and how those may be impacted. I know Superintendent Picard has those same concerns, particularly if we were to mass here on the campus. So all of those things have to be fleshed out. The capital budget you have this year allows you, the school committee, to allocate the funds based on where that conceptual design takes us. And one of the things I emailed to the committee, and then we can talk about in more detail for the 23rd meeting, is the breakout of the campus and elementary. So the reason for those two tracks are there's not much that we can understand at this time, not that much that's concerning about our campus intent. I mean, there'll be some allocation issues, there'll be some prioritization questions, I'm sure, that the school committee will have us adjust. But by and large, our focus on the campus is pretty straightforward. We need to go through the steps that RIDE requires to get our housing aid reimbursement to maintain that property. For the elementary, there's an iterative process that's going to take place. Again, the allocations over the course of that process will be adjusted by the committee as we learn more and take more steps. So an example of that would be if we can do what we want and we find we could do it with the property we own, then we wouldn't have a site acquisition to be concerned with. Alternatively, if we did decide to go that route, then we would have to examine that further. So that's, I hope, clarification on why we don't have beyond the FY22 timeframe more financial information to go through. We won't know those kinds of answers until we get into the conceptual design phase and then start to flesh out what does a particular solution look like in terms of cost.
Thank you, Ned. I just want to add, so basically, based on the information I received in the communication from families or community members, I'd like to clarify just a couple of things. One, there is no vote tonight on any project. Two, the March 23rd meeting was posted early because we're requesting a variance. So by state legislation, we have to post for 20 days. That vote is to allow really what I call the gift of time. It allows the committee and the community to work together to be able to determine that path forward and to clear up. Option A is our starting point. It is not the end point. So with the community feedback, the goal from now until August is to engage, to talk through our teaching and learning vision and say to our 3 towns, all our community members, our families, our educators, what is the vision? And then ensure that the brick and mortar matches our student vision so we can ensure our elementary schools have 21st century learning. There is, like Ryan said, an opportunity to say, well, we have an impasse and maybe not moving forward. But I believe at an earlier meeting, Ryan very articulately said that to bypass the option to access some of the RIDE dollars for a newer and fewer, knowing that we have over $23 million of needs in our elementary school, it really behooved the committee to pursue that. So I think I wanted to make sure that on the vote on March 23rd is, again, not a project vote. It is a vote to extend our time frame to get the application to RIDE for February 2022 to go to the voters to say, yes, we want this in April 2022. This April vote has nothing to do with that project, other than what Ned said, that in our newer and fewer, we have capital projects that we would have to reprioritize should the committee determine that that's the direction officially in August and moves forward, and or doesn't, that we're prepared to handle those projects. The other thing I wanted to note was that there's been some conversation about land. Ned said, we have some properties, the towns have properties that we could look at, but there's this rumor that possibly, people will spike up the cost. Just to be clear, RIDE would require an assessment of land, and then you would have to get fair market value. People just can't say you have to give me this amount of money. That's part of RIDE would never allow us to allocate that funding without fair market value. So that can't happen. And if they tried, they wouldn't allow us to access that way. So I just wanted to make sure that people recognize that. And again, just to reiterate, the option A is a starting point. And the point is the visioning of our community to really get their input to make sure that we design something that makes sense for our community, our students, and our families, and our taxpayers.